You could join us. We're very glad you could join us for our event this evening on 21st Sustainability in the 21st Century, in which we talk through the challenges facing the construction industry, as well as the challenges facing our school. The new Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction, which, as many of you know, incorporates the old Bartlett School of Construction and Project Management, as well as the Institute for Digital Innovation in the Built Environment and the Bartlett Real Estate Institute. So going forward, we will be known as the Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction, and we're delighted with this development. And I'm particularly honored tonight to have three distinguished panelists to join me to discuss what challenges face the construction industry, particularly in the sustainable space, in the question of sustainability going forward, but also to discuss the challenges that this and opportunities that this brings for our school, the Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction. So let me first begin by introducing myself. I am Damaris Kaufman. I am the professor of economics and finance at UCL, and I have been the director of the Bartlett School of Construction and Project Management since February of 2017. And now I'm the director of the Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction going forward. And I'm joined by Sue Kershaw, who is managing director of the Transportation Division of Costain. She's also a Royal Academy of Engineering visiting professor at BSSC and the president of the Association for Project Management. And many of you know, you of course know her in that last capacity. I'm also joined by Maya Nasani, who is the cost assurance co-lead for the Southeast region at Turner & Townsend. She's also an alumna of our program, the MSc in Construction Economics and Management in 2015-16. And in 2018, whilst working as a consultant at Invent, she was nominated for the Women in Construction Engineering Awards. We're very proud of Maya as a distinguished alum and are very impressed by her wide experience of construction in the UK and the Middle East. And last but by no means least, we're joined by Professor Noble Francis, who is the chief economist at the Construction Products Association and honorary professor at BSSC. And I think many of you have heard his recent reflections and forecasts in The Economist and the Financial Times on the direction of the construction industry post-Brexit. So thank you, Noble, Sue, and Maya, for joining us this evening. We're delighted to have you. And I think what I'll do first is to reflect a little bit on our rationale for the name change, and then to speak with each of you about how you see challenges for sustainability in the construction industry and the parts of the industry that you represent. So to begin from the point of view of our school, what we began to realize over the last, say, 5 to 10 years is that our exclusive focus on the commercial management of construction was missing important technological trends in the industry and also missing a growing sense of alarm about sustainable construction in terms of materials and the supply chain. At the same time, we recognized that other institutes in the Bartlett, like the Institute of Digital Innovation in the Built Environment, was very much concerned with digital construction technologies, and that curriculum would enrich our own curriculum. And at the same time, it was clear that shifting our focus from an exclusive emphasis on the construction phase of a built asset to consider construction also as an output, which is to say housing, real estate, and infrastructure, would well be worth doing. So as we began to get to grips with these issues, we realized that the school had a lot of people who worked in construction management who were becoming increasingly concerned about urgent issues in sustainable construction, questions of the circular economy, materials and structures. And we're beginning to use tools like life cycle assessment modeling and embedded carbon analysis, and also becoming interested in construction waste, air pollution, biodiversity loss, and other wider issues, environmental sustainability. So as we began to develop that expertise, we thought that this was an opportunity to pair that expertise with growing expertise we had in the sustainable outputs of construction, sustainable housing, infrastructure, the low carbon transition, and more sustainable models of commercial real estate. So as all of this came together, this seems to us to be the perfect time to rebrand our school, the Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction. But we realize that this means a lot of different things to different people. And one of the reasons that we've brought Noble, Sue, and Maya together tonight is to discuss the different meanings of sustainable construction to them as major industry stakeholders and also as stakeholders in our school, in order to promote a debate about the greatest challenges facing the construction industry with respect to sustainable business models, but also the greatest challenges facing them as construction industry professionals. So I think I'd like to begin with Professor Kershaw, who, of course, as you know, is also the president of the Association for Project Management. And I think she has a very interesting vantage point from which to begin. So Sue, if I may turn to you.
Lovely, Damaris. Thank you very much. And as I said just before, we all love the new name. It's fantastic. It's fitting, and it's just perfect for the time. So sustainable construction to me is really what we all have to do. Construction as an industry is one of the biggest deliverers of carbon in the UK, and in transportation, the road network in particular is contributing way too much carbon. So we have to almost instill in our people that the way we used to build things isn't the way we're going to build them going forward. And in terms of materials, the main culprits are steel and cement and concrete, and we're already looking at ways to deal with that, and also looking at ways of fueling the plants that actually builds the big infrastructure. So it's an incredibly wide, broad and deep subject, and we could talk about it all night. The two elements of interest to me of late have been looking at biodiversity, how we actually make sure that what we do, if we take biodiversity out, we put some more back in after the project's finished, and also the importance of natural capital to keep our country, our very small island, to keep it that very beautiful small island, and really value that natural capital. So they're the two things at the moment, I think, Damaris, that have come of age as sustainability has come of age, that are really in the here and now.
So, I mean, you spoke a bit about how the construction supply chain, particularly the steel and cement, are contributing to carbon emissions. But could you talk a little bit about how the construction industry playbook, for example, might, in trying to reform models of procurement, help to tackle that problem? Or do you think the solution to tackling that problem is elsewhere?
It's a really good point. I mean, the playbook's a marvelous piece of work, and it's looked at virtually everything we do in construction. How can we make it better? And it does have a big section on sustainable procurement, and I think that takes to make that happen, because remember, the playbook is mandated to every single government department and local authority. I think to make that really work, we need some help in guiding those people in terms of what does it really mean. I mean, the words are the words. We have to breathe life into it, and having procurement professionals trained in what sustainable procurement is, making sure it goes out in the tenders and the PQQs, make sure that people can get added marks in the tenders because they're thinking about doing things differently. And there is ways of doing it. I mean, we at Costain do actually have concrete that doesn't have cement in it, for the blinding concrete, the non-structural. And we've done some wacky things. We've got wind turbine blades, and we've taken those and we're using them as reinforcement in the concrete instead of brand new steel, which is becoming more and more expensive. So I think it is about being sustainable when you procure, being really savvy on, I think you said that it's not just I'm going to buy X and I'll go to my usual supplier in China and it'll come, or it's going to be air freighted from so and so. We have to look much more locally now post Brexit. So where are the local providers? Can they perhaps club together to provide one offering under an umbrella to a tier one contractor? How can the consultants think smarter in their designs that actually makes the construction sustainable? So we've all got to do this together, and it's almost, before we kick anything off, we've got to think about how could we do it differently, because we're so used to doing it the same way we've always done it.
That wind turbine example was fascinating, because that is an example of what we call the circular economy in construction materials. But aligning the incentives so that people do this routinely rather than as an exciting experiment is, of course, very difficult. And I'm wondering actually what role you see for higher education institutions like UCL in training people up to do sustainable procurement differently, or do you think that that's something that firms will ultimately have to build capacity within corporate training or other avenues? I mean, how can universities contribute to this reskilling?
I think we should have it as a module in virtually every course we offer, because if it's going to happen, and Costain have pledged to be net zero by 2035, if that's going to happen, every single individual has to be part of it, and we have to make our personal pledges for our projects, and pledges for the organizations we work for. So I think anywhere we can just get that awareness. It reminds me very much of when health and safety legislation first came out, and it was almost brand new. It was, you know, people work on construction sites, people will die on construction sites, and now you look at where we are. I mean, I've had 5 months of no serious accidents. It's almost unheard of. We've worked really hard over many decades to be the best in class in the world on health and safety. Now it's time to look at the environment and to bring that up to the same level. And where we've got health and safety directors, we should have environmental directors, and they should really learn from that health and safety angle, because why reinvent the wheel, Damaris? You know, we've got the behaviors, the training, we've got the value propositions. Let's turn those, take best practice from health and safety and use it in the environmental arena.
That's an exciting challenge, and I think that makes sense, because ultimately, in the end, environmental sustainability is also going to improve health and safety in a whole range of ways. And that is a very apt observation. I wonder, in terms of the role of the Association for Project Management, how do you see the APM dealing with some of these challenges? And is there any way that the APM can work with universities to deliver that kind of training and education, for that matter?
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of our book of knowledge, sustainable procurement is in there. Also, we look at how we train our sponsors. So sponsors are part of the project family, if you like. So APM and the chartered project professional can be project controls, project manager, project sponsor. If you get to the sponsor in particular, who own the business case, the high level stakeholder management, and make sure that they include sustainability within their business case and their brief to the project manager, then you've set it at day one, and the rest will kind of follow. So that would be my immediate first look at what are we doing on sponsorship, and how are we building in sustainability to the book of knowledge.
Okay, no, thank you. That's very helpful. And for the wider audience, I mean, you're aware of this, but we're launching an MBA in major infrastructure delivery, which is taking a lot of attention at the question of sponsorship and getting the sponsors and the firms talking to each other from the very beginning. And of course, our 2 new integrated master's programs, our MSci in construction project management and our MEng in construction engineering management, are also very much about getting both sides together from the very beginning and making sure that people we train and who join the profession do so understanding both vantage points and understanding how to work those together synergistically. So I think it's exciting to hear that. I think I'll turn for a moment then to Professor Francis, who's obviously coming at this from a slightly different angle, insofar as he represents the construction supply chain, the people who are being beaten up for too much embedded carbon. Noble, can you talk a bit about how you see the scale of the challenge ahead for the construction industry?
Yes, thanks, Damaris. I mean, from my perspective, clearly we have net zero targets that are enshrined in law. We're looking at a 78% fall in emissions by 2035 compared with 1990 levels, and that's 3/4 of the way towards net zero in 2050. As Sue mentioned earlier, a significant proportion of emissions come from the built environment, around 40 to 44%. Most of that is from buildings in use rather than the construction element of that, but it's all involved within the built environment. And we're in the year of COP26, the UN Climate Change Conference. So I think we can expect an awful lot of announcements from government that are aimed towards net zero, towards retrofitting the existing stock of buildings, towards decarbonizing the energy network. And the focus very much from government tends to be on decarbonizing the energy network and a focus on new build construction. But when we look at the scale of the challenge, 80% of the homes that we will have in 2050 are already here. So what we need to do is focus on the existing stock of buildings, not just housing, but the existing stock of buildings, and looking at how we make those energy efficient. And it's a grand challenge. It's something that government has struggled with for 10, 15 years now, and has announced policies that have struggled, quite frankly. And that's just within the housing area before we get onto commercial, industrial infrastructure, which will provide even greater challenges. And from the construction supply chains side of things, we have a business model within construction that traditionally is not focused on building better, not necessarily based upon building quality, however you define better and quality. The traditional main contractor, major house builder business models have historically focused on minimizing costs, diversifying risks. And so from my perspective, the key issues are going to be how we change the incentives. Now, the incentives may be for homeowners, commercial developers, clients generally on procuring better. How do we change incentives for the construction supply chain, not just contractors, but architects, specifiers, consultants, main contractors, SMEs? And remember that 86% of employment in construction is in SMEs within the subcontractors and specialists. The builders, merchants, and the product manufacturers, how do we change their focus as well on constructing better? And how do we change the focus of government onto more effective policy rather than focusing on grand announcements that sound very good and get nice PR headlines, but don't actually change very much? And all of these are very difficult changes to enact. Now, from the procurement side of things, the construction playbook, which was published in December last year, could be a game changer. It could make a significant change in how particularly government, but clients generally can procure in a way that is better for everyone in producing outcomes that we're looking for long term. In terms of how the other areas, so the construction supply chain and government, can change, I think the School of Sustainable Construction has a big part to play here. Twofold. Firstly, the research it does can inform government, can inform the whole construction supply chain on how it can change. And then secondly, I think the School of Sustainable Construction can help by effectively producing the people we will need to do it. Because when you think about it, if we go back to the specific example of housing, you're looking at retrofitting 23 million homes just in the UK alone. And the key questions will be who pays for it and who does the work. Now, government policy can focus on who pays for it. In the end, it will be householders, but they can focus on incentive systems. But who actually does the work and make sure that the work is done to a high quality standard? It will have to be quality, highly trained, highly skilled people from construction that do that. So I think there's a great opportunity for the School of Sustainable Construction here to contribute both on the research side in influencing government policy, but helping government turn announcements into effective policy, and in providing the people who will make sure we make that transition to net zero.
Okay, thank you, Noel. Those are very helpful and interesting reflections. And I actually wanted to go back to something you said initially about the scale of retrofit, which is almost unimaginable in terms of the nature of the UK building stock, and the fact that you said over 4/5 of the houses in 20 years time have already been built. But I think that the government is rather doubling down on changing the energy mix. And we see this in other places where, and we know from our own research, some of which has been done in the school, that if you shift to clean energy, if someone has solar panels on their house, then they're thrilled with having solar panels and perceive their energy as green energy. So as a consequence, they leave the lights on and they actually use more electricity than they had done a year before. And you get the impression that government hopes that if it can change the energy mix and make UK energy net zero, that it doesn't really matter how long people keep the air conditioner on, because that will have knocked the problem on the head the other way around. And of course, we know that that's not realistic. But I mean, what would you say in terms of the policy space and changing the conversation about the need for retrofit, if in fact it seems that that's being kind of regarded as a fallback option if we can't get the energy mix sorted out?
I think from government policy perspective, and this is something that could add positively to the debate, is that there isn't going to be one or two simple panaceas here. The scale of what needs to be done is so great that it will have to involve a mix of different energy types. It will have to involve a mix of behavioral change as well as householders. At the moment, you have a situation where doing energy efficiency retrofit work on your home is charged at 20% VAT, whereas energy use is 5% VAT. Energy prices are, for the householder, below the EU average. There are some uncomfortable choices that will need to be made here as government policy goes that will involve people paying more, and how government makes the case for that is going to be an interesting challenge. It's made a lot easier if they can do it on the basis of robust research, and it's a lot easier if they can make the case to householders that these are what the key benefits are of it.
Yep, thank you very much. And to return to your question or your conversation, your reflections about SMEs and the extent to which involving and incentivizing SMEs properly is critical to sustainability challenges in the construction industry, because they represent such a large part of new builds. The construction industry playbook is clearly focused on infrastructure clients and arm's length organizations, including local government. But many of these SMEs are working outside that space and are working for private clients or house developers who are selling to a private market. How do we change perceptions within that part of the industry?
I think at the moment, given that the situation within construction tends to focus very much on major contractors, major house builders, subcontracting out cost and risk to the specialists and the subcontractors, even though the majority of the changes that are recommended within the construction playbook focus on the main contractors, the benefits of the changes that the construction playbook will enact, or are likely to incentivize at the very least, will feed through to the subcontractors and the supply chain generally. So I think from their perspective, your average SME is not going to be reading the construction playbook, but they can still benefit from it, because the majority of the specialists and subcontractors will be working for larger firms up the supply chain anyway, whether it's on infrastructure, commercial developments, or for major house builders. And so the benefits of the construction playbook are not just there for the large firms, they will be there for the small firms as well.
Thank you very much, Noble. I think that's true, and hopefully that will prove to be so and within a reasonable time horizon. I think I'd like to turn now to Maya, who of course, coming at it from the cost assurance and quantity surveying angle, perhaps has her own perspective on this, and how do you see the challenges within the industry, and what does sustainable construction mean to you from your own vantage point at Turner & Townsend?
Thank you, Damaris. With increasing concerns surrounding the climate crisis that we are currently witnessing and the need for greater environmental sustainability, we have got quite reputation in the built environment sector and the way it performed in the past, being responsible for nearly 40% of the global carbon emission and consuming nearly half of the world's natural resources. It is a priority that we transform the sector to a one that is net zero emission, circular and resilient. Since Paris Agreement, the role of this sector to achieve these goals has been crucial. All entities and professionals are challenged to deliver improvements, not only in the outputs of the project or the programs, but also in the inputs of the operations and the operations also of the supply chain. Another reputation that we have that we don't like to change the way we work. However, like in the UK recently, several councils, public entities, and private companies expressed a confirmed commitment to become carbon neutral and think pragmatically and strategically about how we can minimize the impact of our activities in the construction industry. So I agree with Noble. The challenge today is not only producing new building and assets that are environmental friendly, but also retrofitting the ones that we already have. And the sector is very pragmatic, and the topic is very broad. I'll try to cover some commercial aspects of these commercial challenges the sector is facing to achieve these goals that I'm exposed to. I'll start with the demand and the fragmentation of this market. If we compare the residential against the commercial market, for example, we would see a serious fragmentation, such as difference in energy prices, the return on investment for sustainability modification, and the competition among developers and builders in this sector. To compare those with infrastructure sector, we can see also a completely different dynamics. I think that we can't change the dynamics this industry operates in, but we can change the way we work, the policies, legislation, and most importantly, we can build on the knowledge that we have for each of them. Whenever I reflect on the net zero agenda and I read news about the climate crisis, the first thing I ask myself, do we really have the knowledge to achieve this? And from my experience and what I have seen so far, that we are aiming at a distant target, given the knowledge we have at the moment. And the solution that we want to apply in the project are not always readily available, even for the most competent professionals. And at this stage, we need to work hard to build and develop more knowledge and find a way to manage the knowledge that we develop, not only like developing on the knowledge, but how we manage it and we share it among each other, work collaboratively with each other as private, public sector, academia as well. And
if I could ask you to just to reflect for a moment, do you think that the knowledge that we need to find or discover is primarily technical knowledge about more sustainable materials or how to design more sustainable structures, or use of, say, remediation technologies like carbon capture, carbon storage, at point source for the construction supply chain, or do you think that the knowledge that we need to develop is actually knowledge around the business models themselves within the construction industry, so that we're able to deploy the new technological and technical knowledge in a more efficient way? Or is it a bit of both? Or how do you understand that?
I think they are all, I think they are all interrelated, but from where I work, of course, whenever we say construction project and infrastructure project, they are always concerned about the budget and the risk-adverse approach that many contractors choose to employ. And sustainability, I think, adds another dimension to this topic. And achieving those topics to buy new technology or to have a new way of procurement or a design problem, it's always costly. And the business model for most tier one, for example, are not very lucrative to cover these. And the contracts that they operate with is not also very supportive and accommodating to their needs. I can provide one example from a project that I'm currently working on. So I provide cost assurance to my client. This can take form in auditing tier one projects that are working in an infrastructure project. My service is usually requested when things go wrong. The example that I'm going to tell is for upgrading a network for utility companies, which I am providing a final account audit for, a framework design. The contract is design and build agreement and a gain and pay mechanism. The original order value for that project was 15 million, but the project outturn now is 27. The main reason for this is the project has to meet emissions targets, but the design basically failed to provide the technical solution. And to fix this, buying the technology was very expensive. And so to be honest, when I think of an answer to your question, I think of everything combining together. If we need to build on the knowledge, if we need to use different ways than what we are now using, and different way of contracts, we just need to think out of the box, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And that relates to a question that Peter McDermott raised in the Q&A. And what he's essentially saying is if we're to use Sue's analogy of health and safety, how much of this is and if Sue's right that we really need to expect the client to, build this into the tendering process and to mark tenders accordingly, is this something that can only be achieved by primary legislation? And, should we lobby for that or hope for that? Or are there other solutions that fall short of primary legislation to achieve that kind of realignment of incentives? I mean, what's your view on that as someone who audits these things when they go wrong? Is there legislation you'd like to see? And what alternatives do you think there are?
Yeah, I think legislation should support more both the contractors maybe and also the company that is expanding their network or doing infrastructure. I think that we need just to change the way they are working. And from now, from the legislation that we currently have, we don't have incentives, or contractors and don't have incentives to take the extra step to find a solution for carbon emissions or another emissions that they want to eliminate.
Oh, in fact, actually, some of the incentives are the opposite. But
yeah.
Sue, do you want to come in on that in terms of Peter's question and your own reflections? Sue, you're muted.
Thanks, Damaris. Legislation has its uses, but it usually takes forever to get through. And by the time it's through, usually the industry is sort of changing its ways. There are obviously big exceptions to that. I think contractors actually are incentivizing themselves and are pushing clients to really think about this carefully. So we're saying to clients, when you put out a tender for HS2, for example, where is the criteria for sustainability? What are you doing on net zero? Advising that we want to do this together. It sounds unbelievable, particularly post-Brexit. The collaboration levels are fantastic. And what's that resulted in? Well, HS2 is state of the art on phase 1 in terms of sustainability and net zero. And we've gone as far as to actually involve some research from SWECO, looking at what is that tipping point whereby your approach to net zero is going to cost more money. If it costs more money to the client, then is the client going to pay that more money, or are they going to say, actually, no, let's go back to cost, let's forget sustainability? Or do the banks come to the rescue with private money, which is out there now at the moment, saying we'll fill that gap, a mini PFI, if you like. So it's almost organically happening without legislation, Damaris, and I think that's really good for the industry.
Well, I think, and that is exciting, and I think that's certainly true for major infrastructure projects. I think that what Noble was expressing some concern about is some wider aspects of the industry, and John Kelsey has a question about home builders, for instance, and that is his question, as I understand it, is that given there's a crisis of quality anyway, if you raise the expectations for sustainability, are they just going to cut quality elsewhere in new builds? And Noble, how do you incentivize them to do well by doing good, as it were?
Well,
how do we get them to see that the quality? Go ahead, Noble.
Certainly from the house building perspective, the major house builder business model tends to be based around uplifting land value and building homes merely to realize the finance from that, in which case the incentives are largely to build the least quality home that you can get away with. And if there are any house builders on the call, apologies, but that's the way it is. And so in which respect, if that least quality that is acceptable has to be brought up as a level. It has to be brought up as a level in terms of quality in all its forms for house building, whether it's on the energy efficiency side, whether it's on the ventilation side, air quality side, the structural quality of the unit as well. All of those need to be brought up in terms of level. And if you think about it, the main reason house builders have done relatively well over the past year, or you could argue since Help to Buy came in March 2013, is that government incentives have stimulated the housing market and the house building market, in which case, although 85% of the house building market is private sector, government has a significant amount of sway in that market, in which case, with any of the incentives that are there to increase house price inflation, that are there to increase the number of units being built, they should be alongside rules based upon the quality in all its forms, not just in terms of energy efficiency. There are not many other areas of construction in which the client would accept poor quality in all its forms.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Noble, for that reflection. And I think you're absolutely right. They still have a lot of leverage, even if it is the private market. What I think I would say in response to this is, I think given the reflections we've heard, it's clear that we need a mix of technological solutions, managerial solutions, of socio-technological solutions, and political solutions to affect sustainable transitions within the construction industry. I think now that we're really coming to the last, say, 10 minutes of the formal part before we shift to question and answer. And when we do shift to question and answer, please use the Q&A rather than the chat function, and we'll make an effort to answer your questions either in text or in a roundtable form. But before we move to that, I think in the next 10 minutes, what I'd like to do is ask each of the speakers in turn to kind of reflect briefly on what they would perceive to be their hopes for the industry within the next 10 years, and then also what they think the biggest pitfalls are, and perhaps even a little bit on how the school might contribute to realizing those hopes for the industry. So let's start with Maya. What do you want to see changed, and how can we contribute to that? And what are the biggest pitfalls?
I think to achieve the net zero roadmap, we need to think to find out of the box solutions in our contracts, the way of working, even the way we look at our budget, project budgets, the policies and resourcing. I think we need to find ways to boost productivities and digital transformation, just to help us to reduce that element of budget constraints that we currently have. And of course, modern methods of construction. I would really hope that I can see the industry working together. So usually what we see in the academia, that they are working and finding like cutting edge solutions, but at the same time, the pressure that the industry have is very away from it, and they don't collaborate, and they don't take this, they don't change this experience. So I hope that collaborative working is going to be in another dimension we will be witnessing.
Thank you for that. And I think we certainly value our industry collaborations, and all three of you to an extent represent different dimensions of them. And certainly Sue and Noble are in senior roles as honorary professors and visiting professors, helping to transfer knowledge from the industry into the school and vice versa. But I think what these kinds of close collaborations between industry and academia will look like going forward is something we need to, and I'm wondering, if Sue, in answering the question about her greatest hopes for the industry in the next 5 to 10 years, might also reflect as the president of the APM on how to improve academic.
Yeah, absolutely, Damaris. As a real live example, at Costain, we sponsored 21 PhDs to actually do their PhDs, but not only that, but come back into the business and use that knowledge to actually build up a better business and build up their careers. So I think there's got to be a better link, whether it's that end of the scale coming out or it's the visiting professors going in and adding real value about what's happening, or if it's offering students placements so that they can see what it's like out there in the real world. Whatever it is, there's ways of actually making that happen. So my hope is that there will be a better bond. I think in terms of my general hopes for the industry, you know, the build back better, faster, greener is something we've all got to think. Now stop thinking about that's how we used to do it. Think about how we're going to do it now. And that mindset is really going to add to the UK economy, particularly in infrastructure, which is just growing from strength to strength to strength to such a degree. Our skills shortage before COVID, which was about 80,000 engineers a year, has just gone through the roof, which is actually a good thing because we're recruiting from a more diverse workforce. So if you think, what is the built environment? It's not all about civil engineering or building or QSing or the supply chain. It's about bringing in historians who understand the context, bringing in people who've done geography, bringing in behavioral scientists, you know, and when you start doing that, and you have those people in your team with the sustainability sort of focus, you've got a completely different team and mindset that would challenge each other and really produce something brilliant. And I think the one big pitfall for me is we forget COVID happens, we forget Brexit happens, we forget climate change is going to happen, and we just keep on doing what we've always done.
Thank you. And that's actually very encouraging to hear, because one of the things that I'm actually proudest of at the Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction is the diversity intellectually and demographically. The school has, in 70 members of staff, 18 different primary nationalities and 17 different PhD fields. And clearly construction management and civil engineering are the modal fields. They're the most common, but it still runs the gambit from sociology, economic history, economic geography, through to mathematics, as well as technical engineering fields, in addition to civil engineering, but architectural engineering, chemical engineering. We have a wide range of different views represented, and we have, you know, economists and finance academics and people in operations management and organizational research, all working together to explore these common topics. So I'm glad to hear that you think that that's an asset, because I think that is what really sets us apart from many other schools who, you know, represent similar disciplinary interests at our competitor universities. So thank you. It's good to hear that. Noble, let's turn to you from your vantage point with the CPA. What do you think the greatest challenges are, the biggest pitfalls, and what can we do to rise to those challenges as a school?
I think in terms of greatest challenges, any of the changes, the big changes that we would want to see to be able to build back better within the construction supply chain require large upfront investment for a long-term rate of return. So significant investment in digitalization, in off-site manufacturing / modern methods of construction, or in areas of being able to build better quality in all its forms. So from my perspective, my great hopes are that construction can rely on the fact that government will act on the changes in the construction playbook, that government will provide a consistent pipeline of projects, major projects under infrastructure, not just do one major nuclear power station 5 years late and then nothing for another 5 years. Because if you have that consistent pipeline of projects and programs, then firms within the construction supply chain, all areas, can invest in the knowledge that the rate of return will be there. And we need that investment for net zero, for modern methods of construction, as Maya was mentioning, for digitalization. And all of those are areas where we will need significant change if we're going to end up with higher productivity and building back better in all its forms.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think there is now time for questions from the floor. And as we said, we would prefer if people could use the Q&A function because that allows speakers to answer the questions both verbally and in written form. What I should also say, and I should have said this at the very beginning, but after the formal bit of this is done at 6 p.m., there are also networking opportunities available via Wonder Room. So we're not going to use the Zoom breakout. We'll go to Wonder Room and we'll provide you with the links to go to Wonder Room should you wish to join us afterwards for networking opportunities. But for now, there is time for questions. And I know that one of the questions which appeared in the chat and not in the Q&A came from Gabrielle Gassani, who was asking, quote, do you think that the environment should be considered and treated as an asset in any legislation that aims to achieve net zero economies? Do you think this would create new business models and mechanisms, i.e. carbon tax, incentives, public procurement, to accelerate net zero, for example, unquote? Would you like to reflect on that, Noble, from your point of view?
It's an interesting point. I think for anything in which we want to take account of the environment, it would not only have to be done from a UK perspective, but globally, just purely because if you deal with things like environment as an asset on a nation basis, you skew the incentives. And so what we don't want to do is end up in a position where we start shifting production of construction products to a far off country and then start importing it from there. There is certainly an argument to be made for treating the environment as an asset in terms of the rate of return on that asset, but also the costs of damage to that as well. But I think it would have to be done cross-border, not just with the UK on its own. Otherwise, you do heavily skew incentive systems.
No, I think that's right. And I think actually as the professor of economics and finance, what I would say is that these things are addressed principally in two ways. In environmental economics, it's a question of simply addressing the scale of negative externality from greenhouse gas emissions or pollution or construction waste, and figuring out ways to price that more accurately to find more accurate predictions of discount rates, and as a consequence to internalize those externalities in one way or another, and to figure out who best bears the costs and bears the risks attendant to them. And these are technical questions that can be resolved with empirical research. There are also people who advocate for more of an ecological economics, more of a kind of systems thinking, which incorporates the natural environment into circular economies and ways of modeling them. That's a bit more ambitious an ask in terms of how we can develop those models fast enough to incorporate them in primary legislation. So I think most of the people working in the public policy space are working within the frame of environmental economics, and this question of how you mobilize thinking from ecological economics and incorporate that into public policy is a bit more of a distant ambition, but it's certainly true that more work should be done in that area and can be done in that area. And we certainly have people who are doing PhD work across the Bartlett in that area, not exclusively at the Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction. Some of them are working in the Institute for Sustainable Resources or the Energy Institute. But these are larger questions of economic theory that I think are rather difficult to give a single answer to. But Sue and Maya, from a cost assurance standpoint, I mean, how do you think about quote unquote environmental assets within your own framework?
You're on mute.
Hi, sorry. I think at some point we need to look at the environment as an asset, and we need to know, as Noble said, how much damage we caused to this asset that we have, and how much it can sustain, and how we can rehabilitate it. From that perspective, I think yes, I would agree. It's in the long future, but we would look at it this way.
Sue, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting way of looking at it.
Ask about definitions of the construction industry.
Yeah, it's because if you think of it as an asset, it's actually much more tangible. And we've seen already the changes in legislation, the environmental bill that's going through at the moment. There's a demand for net gain on biodiversity and habitats, for example, and this drive for they're calling it the nature positive future for the UK. So I think the great minds in Whitehall and Westminster are sort of on your wavelength, Gabriella, very much. And on a smaller level, I think, because legislation does take a long time, I think we can introduce the asset concept when we're looking at social value in our contracts, which we are being measured on. We're being measured on so what social value does an improved environment give you, and how do you measure the benefits of that? And that's something that's extremely powerful, not only to the investors in a project, but to the people who live around that project. So I think your question is an absolutely excellent one.
Okay, thank you. There's a final question about the boundaries of the construction industry, and I think we'll start with Noble, because he does in fact do forecasting for the construction industry. But the question here, from what I gather, is how to make sure that the supply chain is always and everywhere accounted for as part of the construction industry, so that the construction industry doesn't shirk responsibility by sort of ignoring aspects of the supply chain that might be included in certain kinds of economic forecasting.
That's an interesting question. It's very challenging. If you look at the way construction is recorded by the Office for National Statistics and by government, it tends to be a relatively narrow definition, which is industry category 45, which is effectively covering contractors' activity and product manufacturing. It doesn't include builders merchants, it doesn't include architects, and it doesn't include professionals like cost consultants and so on. So it is a relatively narrow definition. It also doesn't account for construction activity that is done by non-contractor firms like engineering firms or direct labor organizations within a council. So it is a challenge. Construction is a very complicated industry. It has a very long fragmented supply chain across lots of different areas, and it is doing activity within 30 different sectors and subsectors that we measure, producing bespoke buildings almost every time. So it is very difficult, and it's something we're trying to get the Office for National Statistics to move on to get a broader measure of construction activity. But the Office for National Statistics is not great at change. And because it's such a complicated industry and it feeds into so many different other areas, it's not a very clear and distinct industry to measure.
And yeah, no, thank you very much for that, Noble. That's a very helpful explanation. The final part of that question was, how might we work to defragmentize the industry as a first step in order to avoid shifting accountabilities? And I think I would like to end by offering each of you an opportunity to reflect on whether, is it really that we need to defragmentize the industry, or can we embrace the fragmentation and come up with solutions, for sustainability that manage to embrace that fragmentation? I mean, how do you see the question of fragmentation within the industry, and how does that relate to the sustainability challenge? So Sue, would you like to speak to that because of your role?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there is fragmentation, but for a very good reason, because of the way the industry works. So when I first started off, every contractor had direct labor and direct plant, and that they could do everything. And then they suddenly realized when the jobs weren't coming in, they had this huge yard full of stuff they couldn't shift, and it just took them under. So that's why we've moved to subcontracting and subcontracting to try and make the supply chain as lean as possible to give the clients the best value. So I think in a way that is recognized. I think what we've got to do better is work together and respect each other's worlds. So put ourselves in the place of a subcontractor. We can't send all the risk down to the bottom line, because that is basically, if you send all the risk down to the smallest SME, they go bust and then it comes up through and the whole job stops. So I think it's having that respect. It's also working together in a really collaborative and integrated way, that you wouldn't notice it wasn't one unit, that everyone working on that job, say, is all one team delivering that job. And that's a behavioral mental thing you've got to change. And I see that happening in really successful JVs like Tideway, for example, the sewer under the Thames. You go on the Tideway site, you have no idea there's 3 contractors on there. They're just working totally together. So I think it's being grown up and adult about the relationships and respecting each other. And it is integrating and collaborating rather than trying to fit everything in one shoebox. Damaris, that would be my view.
Well, thank you. And we'll end with Maya. From your point of view in cost assurance, how do we improve accountability and stop people from shifting responsibility?
So if we want to improve accountability, I think we should emphasize on the lack of effective auditing mechanism, either for the emissions or even for the money that we spent on the budget, and whether minimum regulatory requirements was met, or there is no policing and auditing to make sure that the requirements have been fulfilled. So the absence of auditing mechanism can diminish accountability for sustainability transition, and as such renders efforts in the design stage with regulations.
Okay. No, thank you very much for that. So Sue has provided a positive model of encouraging people to behave as grown-ups and to recognize that it's possible to have teams of different contractors. And Maya suggesting that in the absence of that, we at least need better legislation around auditing. And I think both of those things are true at once. I want to thank all three of you for contributing to a rich discussion. I hope the audience has appreciated the diversity of views that you brought to this and the incredible expertise you represent and the different stages of your career. And I hope that they look to you as role models as careers move forward. So I would like to just end really by thanking you for taking the time and to ask you if you have any final quick thoughts. Noble? Or Sue? Yeah, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, I wish you the best luck with this launch and the future of the school. It's really exciting, Damaris.
Well, thank you very much. And we really appreciate your taking the time to join us. Noble, do you have any final thoughts?
Only final thoughts are Sue's exactly right on collaboration. That will be key going forward. I think Maya's correct about auditing. So there's a bit of carrot and stick there. And I just reiterate that I think the School of Sustainable Construction has lots of opportunities to help government and industry on this going forward.
Thank you very much, Noble. I momentarily lost my cursor. Maya, do you have any final thoughts?
Nothing. Good luck to everyone. I think it's a task to make, and I think I would agree also with Sue that if we work, it's the only way to achieve this is working collaboratively and with a new mindset.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your thoughts as well. And again, thank you all for joining us. We have pasted the link to Wonder Room, so we hope that you'll join us for some additional networking opportunities afterwards. I think you can hear my son in the background. So we have indeed arrived at 6 p.m. And again, thank you all, the attendees as well, for taking your time this afternoon to join us for this chat. And we look forward to engaging with you going forward. So have a good evening.
Okay,
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.